Sheldon and I, we work together every single day on all of these energy and environment issues, trying to raise our voices to give this issue the push, the shove, which it needs. And Sheldon is a public policy powerhouse and the conscience of the Senate on climate change issues. And every week he takes the floor of the Senate to speak out on the need to act on climate issues. And Sheldon is armed only with a poster and the latest data as he makes his case on the Senate floor. And he speaks truth to power, holding the fossil fuel industry accountable for their lies and for their misinformation campaigns. Sheldon has the wisdom of Thoreau and the energy of a wind turbine in a hurricane. And I am so fortunate to call Sheldon my friend. Everyone in this room knows that this climate crisis is real. Scientists have warned us about the danger of climate change for years. The world is warming, sea levels are rising, storms are more extreme, the oceans are more acidic. 2015 was the hottest year on record. This past July and August of 2016 were the hottest ever recorded. According to NOAA, we have now experienced 16 straight record warming months. A streak that is so long that the record-breaking heat is unprecedented in 137 years of temperature observation. And the Republicans and the deniers say, well, how can you be so sure? How can you measure that? And you know how we do it? Thermometers. They had them 137 years ago. So we actually know that it's warmer. That same thermometer your mother used to put in your mouth when you were 5 is the same thermometer we're using today. Unfortunately, we know that the oil and coal industries won't let up on funding climate denial and misinformation campaigns. But their obstruction and denial tactics are as bogus as a degree from Trump University, which is exactly where Donald Trump seems to have gotten his education in energy and environment issues. He calls global warming a hoax, but then he had to build a wall to protect his golf course in Ireland from climate change. During this week's presidential debate, Trump tried to deny that he denied global warming. But we all know the truth. He says he wants an all of the above energy agenda. But he's really running on a platform of oil above all. We have an economic imperative to act on climate. We have a security imperative to act on climate. We have a moral imperative to act on climate. And now we have an international agreement to serve as a roadmap to help us to get to the cuts in global warming emissions that we need to avoid the worst, most catastrophic consequences of dangerous global warming. Both the developed and the developing nations have agreed that it is time to act. As of today, 60 nations have already formally adopted the Climate Accord, developed in Paris in December of last year. Sheldon and I went to Paris in the midst of those negotiations to ensure that the nations of the world knew that Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan did not speak for the United States of America, and that we had President Obama's back as he was making these promises to the rest of the world. And right now, 60 countries, representing almost 48% of global warming emissions, have signed the agreement. For the agreement to go into full effect, we need 55 countries that account for at least 55% of global carbon emissions. Next week, India will announce its commitment to signing the climate agreement. And we learned this morning that the European Union environmental ministers are going to fast-track their consideration of and approval of the Paris Accord, meaning that when the world meets in Morocco in November, that this agreement will have all the support it needs in order to go into effect and to begin this long, long program with the world now in agreement in reducing dramatically the amount of greenhouse gases that are going up. But to fulfill the promise of Paris, we must intensify the actions and investments necessary for a sustainable, clean energy future. As a technological giant, the United States must lead the clean energy revolution. Over the last decade, we have had a renewable renaissance in this country. In 2005, we installed 79 total megawatts of solar. 79 total. Last year, we installed 100 times that amount, 7,500 megawatts. That all happened in 10 years. That all happened because of your efforts. That all happened because we were able to change the way in which our country and our policies dealt with these issues. We have gone, since 2005, from fewer than 10,000 megawatts of wind and solar total in America to 100,000 megawatts of wind and solar by 2005. Now here's the good news. We are going to even higher numbers. Now to give you an idea of what 100,000 megawatts is, from the beginning of time, 70 years ago, until today, we have installed 100,000 megawatts of nuclear power. From 2005 until today, we have installed 90,000 additional wind and solar on top of the 10,000 which we had in 2005. That's a revolution. Now, back in 2005, total wind and solar in the United States, 0.5% of all electricity came from wind and solar in 2005. Today, it's up to 7%. That wasn't on the books of the experts in 2005 that we could make such a dramatic change. And by the way, we are now adding 1.5% every single year to the grand total of all electricity generated in the United States from wind and solar. This year, we are going to add 14,000 new megawatts of solar and 9,000 new megawatts of wind to that total of 100,000. Meaning we're now going to have, by the end of this year, about 125,000 megawatts of wind and solar. And by the end of next year, we are going to be over 150,000 megawatts of wind and solar in the United States. Now, that's great news. The even better news is that we now have 400,000 people employed in the wind and the solar industry. We have 310,000 people who are employed in the solar industry. We have 88,000 people installed who are working in the wind industry. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is political power. These people with jobs in these industries are the people ultimately who are going to change the minds of people in Congress with regard to these technologies all over America. When Chuck Grassley has to deal with the fact that there are days out in Iowa where half of all of the electricity comes from wind, that's going to change your conversation with Mitch McConnell, who will want more coal subsidies, more protection for the coal industry. So these employees in these new industries are ultimately going to be the political power that is created in order to change the dynamic that is necessary to further accelerate these changes. By 2020, we are on track to have 600,000 people in the United States employed in the wind and solar industry. That's compared to right now, 52,000 people working in the coal mining industry. 600,000 wind and solar, 52,000 for coal mining. So we can see that these changes are taking place. They're taking place dramatically, but they're only taking place because we have been able, in Congress, Sheldon and I and our allies in the House and Senate, working with President Obama, have been able to put on the books these changes in tax policy, in the stimulus bill, that partnering with states that have renewable electricity standards, like Rhode Island, like Massachusetts, to completely change the way in which people view how these changes are possible. If we stay on the same pace, and we don't even accelerate the pace that we are on right now, by adding 1.5% every single year between now and 2030 to what we will have by the end of next year, 30% of all electricity in America will come from wind and solar by the year 2030. 30%. Now, if you add in the 7% that comes from hydropower, now you're up to 37% of all electricity. If you add in nuclear power, which will be about 18% of all electricity, still by the year 2030, you're up to 55% of all electricity that is generated in the United States will be non-fossil fuel by the year 2030 if we stay on the current pace. But we can do more, and we must do more. Massachusetts and New England were once the nation's leading power producers. When Melville wrote Moby Dick by the light of a whale oil lamp, and now we have the chance in New England to once again be at the forefront of an energy revolution in offshore wind. In New England, we are the home of the perfect storm. We know the power of the winds off of our shores. We are the Saudi Arabia of offshore wind here in New England. And Rhode Island is leading the way. Rhode Island is the home of the Tennis Hall of Fame. And now you are poised to join the Offshore Wind Hall of Fame. By the end of the year, the country's first offshore wind farms will be operating off the coast of Block Island. And it's scheduled to produce that first clean electrical generating power using the winds up the coastlines of our country. The answer to our clean energy future is truly blowing in the wind. And we have a chance to do much better than we have done in the past. Massachusetts also has now passed a new state requirement to purchase 1,600 megawatts of offshore wind over the next decade. So we will have support at the state level in creating a market to begin to develop the tremendous potential of this clean energy resource. But we also need federal support. We achieved the tremendous growth in wind and solar over the last decade because of the combination of state and federal support. 30 states enacted renewable electricity standards, but we also needed tax incentives from the federal government in order to make sure that we accelerated the pace of the installation of renewable energy. In 2008, we passed an 8-year extension of the solar investment tax credit. We gave the solar industry the certainty which it needed. And that is what we need to do now for the offshore wind industry. We need strong policies at the state level to promote the development of this resource, but we also need to provide long-term certainty to this industry in the United States tax code. The tax deal that Congress reached in December of last year was great for solar. That extended it out as a tax break out to 2021, 2022. But offshore wind was left behind. According to the Energy Department, no additional offshore wind projects will be able to take advantage of the wind tax credits before they expire in 2019. So that's a big disincentive to companies if they're thinking about building wind off the coast of Rhode Island, or Massachusetts, or any other part of the United States. So what Sheldon and I have done is we have introduced legislation in the Senate, and Jim Langevin has done so in the House of Representatives, called the Offshore Wind Act. And it would extend the full 30% investment tax credit for offshore wind that onshore wind has received over the last decades. We need to have equality in the treatment of offshore wind that we have given to onshore wind over this revolutionary period of time. That would give the offshore wind industry the certainty which it needs in the tax code to just take off. The Department of Energy has said that we could have 20,000 megawatts of offshore wind by the year 2030, but only with policy certainty. We can't let that opportunity go by. Sheldon and I have been organizing other senators in this fight for offshore wind, but we need even more help if we're going to be successful. And I will tell you one thing, Sheldon and I do not intend on losing this battle, because we have to continue our commitments to nurturing and growing the offshore wind industry, because we will put steel workers and iron workers and welders and electricians to work building a new backbone for a new clean energy economy here in New England and all across the United States of America. The cost of offshore wind in the United Kingdom has already fallen by more than 30%, and that trend is continuing. Europe is ahead of us, but our wind off of the coast of New England is the best wind in the world, and so we may be behind, but this is like an America's Cup of competition in terms of who will be able to build the most energy efficient and lowest cost electrical generating capacity offshore in the world. We have an opportunity to take advantage of what has already happened in Europe. We can bend the cost curve down on offshore wind. We can take advantage of that here in our own country. So this is an enormous opportunity for us, and we here in New England, we know that we can do this. Massachusetts and Rhode Island partnered with 7 other states to create the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. The skeptics said we were going to destroy our own economies. We were going to so dramatically increase the price of electricity that we would drive industries away. Well, here is what has happened. Across these 9 states, we have seen a 40% reduction in greenhouse gases in the electrical generating sector over the last 8 years, while simultaneously seeing a 28% increase in gross domestic product. And so we've shown that, as my mother used to say, that you can work smarter and not harder. That you can figure that out. By the way, my mother used to say that immediately before. She would say, Eddie, I'm going to donate your brain to Harvard Medical School as a completely unused human organ. You have to learn how to work smarter. That's what this is all about. It's how do we take all of these technologies, put them into place, and start working smarter. We're not damaging ourselves. We're lowering the cost of electrical generation, and we're leaving a legacy for future generations that they are going to thank us for. So that's the opportunity which we have. The President's Clean Power Plan is now before the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. They heard the case on the President's Clean Power Plan on Wednesday before the DC Circuit. 10 judges hearing this case. I went over to hear the arguments. I went over to hear Professor Larry Trotter from Harvard Law School defending Peabody Coal in this court, that there should be a complete and total nullification of this Clean Power Plan, which is a 32% reduction in greenhouse gases, not just in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative of New England and New York and Maryland and Delaware, but this would be 32% the whole country by 2030. There's great flexibility in this plan, and it is something which Sheldon and I believe quite strongly is going to be upheld. Well, I actually have never sat in the DC Circuit. This is a huge courtroom. It's like the size of this room. It was like the 7th game of the World Series. It was like the Red Sox Cubs. And it was amazing. Row after row after row after row of lobbyists and lawyers just sitting there. Fortunes being spent on this case to void the President's Clean Power Plan. Merrick Garland didn't even sit, because if he goes to the Supreme Court, he could actually cast this deciding vote. So there's 10 we have to decide. 6 have been nominated by Democratic presidents, 4 by Republican. But the intensity in that room was just something that reflected this pivotal point that we are at, that we are about to, if we win, just sort of accelerate this change that we will be looking at, this fossil fuel electrical generating history in a rearview mirror. So this was a very telling moment. It actually makes it quite clear to me why it's so important for Hillary Clinton to be the next president of the United States, so that we can have 1, 2, 3 new Supreme Court justices over the next couple of years, who will be able to ensure that the laws of the states and the laws that the Congress puts on the books are in fact upheld in the clean energy, in the environmental sector. Secondly, I am the House of Representatives author of the law which President Obama used in order to increase the fuel economy standards of the vehicles which we drive to 54.5 miles per gallon by the year 2025. That's why we now see kind of dashboards on new cars all looking like spaceships. That's why Elon Musk was able to raise so much money in the private sector, because there was a law saying that we had to meet this very high goal. Well, in 2017, there's a review of the 54.5 mile per gallon goal. If President Trump is making that decision, we know, unfortunately, that he will, with crocodile tears, say that it's so unfortunate that the industry cannot reach that goal. And we will start to retreat from the reduction in greenhouse gases coming out of the automotive sector that we're already beginning to see in our country. That's a second good reason why this presidential election is so important. The second reason why it's so critical that the EPA, the Supreme Court, have people who are going to interpret the laws in a way that will result in dramatic reductions in these dangerous anthropogenic gases. So last year, as a graduate of the Immaculate Conception Grammar School, Malden Catholic, Boston College, and Boston College Law School. At that point, you have a choice of getting ordained or taking the bar exam. I was honored with Sheldon to sit on the floor of Congress and to have Pope Francis, a Jesuit. Who would have ever thought that the College of Congress would elect a Jesuit who taught high school chemistry to be the Pope? And so with John Boehner over his shoulder, he lectured to Congress on the moral responsibility which we have in the United States to lead the world on climate change. He said, one, the evidence is very clear that these gases are warming the planet dangerously. That second, that it's caused by activities of human beings. And the third, that the most dangerous consequences are going to be felt by the most poor people on the planet. They will be the ones least able to protect themselves, and that the United States had a moral responsibility to do something about it. That is what Sheldon and I try to do every single day. We try to make sure that, that if in 2100 we have not been successful, that the least that we would have been able to say is that we tried, we really tried to do all that we could to reduce this danger. We have a real chance here to make a big difference the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years. At that point, it will have a momentum of its own. There will be millions of people working in this energy sector. And I think we'll be well on our way to being a leader in exporting these clean energy technologies around the world. So we thank each and every one of you for everything you do every day. I can tell you what a great honor it is for me to partner with Sheldon every day in battling these forces of ignorance that unfortunately overpopulate the Republican Party. But at the end of the day, I think victory is within our grasp. And only with your continued energy will we be successful. But I think we can actually look to a day where children will have to look to history books to find that there ever was such a thing as dangerous global warming. And it will be because of your efforts. Thank you all so much.